morning and good evening at your place, Jules Alvarado. I want to welcome you very, very warmly. I'm happy that you also give me some little interview for this summit. And I want to ask you to introduce yourself. I know you since many, many years because I just saw an interview at YouTube and I started following you and made a course and studied your work, and it inspired me deeply because years ago there was nothing like trauma-informed care, and I was working in psychiatry as a doctor, and I got a mom from 5 kids, and your work is so much needed, and I'm so happy that it inspired me, and I started also to get educated. But please introduce yourself. Jules Alvarado, happy to.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for your service and for making this kind of information available to whoever it's meant to land with, right? It will land where it is meant to land. My name is Jules, and I'm a mother, and I'm also a human being who has been through some horrific experiences of my own. And over the course of my own journey from deep woundedness, trauma woundedness, to wisdom, learning the transformational process from the place where we suffer to learning from that suffering and being able to share it. That's how I come to you today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So what kind of work did you do the last years? You developed a huge thing. You started to educate families, foster parents, and to teach how to help traumatized kids. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happened for me organically, this was not planned. I wanted nothing more than to be a mother like my mother and to bring children into the world and to love them and nurture them the way that my mother loved and nurtured me. But through that process, I was also introduced to children in a foster care system in the United States. And we had the capacity to bring more children into our family, and we chose to do that along with our 4 biological children. And it was through the sitting with, being with, the feeling with, the experience with these children that I really began to understand that the formal Western medical model of treatment for what we now know as complex trauma and attachment disruption didn't seem to bring the level of healing, not only for my children, but for myself that I was looking for. And so as I began to feel this relationship between me and the children who we cared for unfolding, of course, I experienced my own internal energetic explosions. Some people call them trauma triggers. I call them energetic explosions. And I recognized the necessity to look in the mirror and to understand what was happening in my collective field, in my generational field, in my ancestral field, and in my present day field, and understand the impact of what these children brought to me was not just a shared trauma experience, but also the opportunity for a parallel process in healing. And that's how this journey began to unfold for me, out of the necessity for myself and for the children who were living in our home.
Yes. And what did you do to heal for yourself? That's a very complex question. I know that's not easy to answer, but just to give a sense of the way you do it.
I began to sit quietly. Trauma creates a sense of fragmentation in us. And when trauma is alive in the cells of our body and in the memories of our brains, when trauma is alive in my somatic experience, my psychological experience, my physical and spiritual experience, it's chaotic, it's fragmented, it is running and moving, afraid to slow down. And I recognized that not only were the kids running all over our home and all over the neighborhood and all over the park and all over their classrooms, but in my mind and in my body, I was running with them. And so the first piece for me was learning to sit with whatever came up for me, to face it, to understand it, to be curious about it instead of running from it. And then to learn how to be in relationship to it, to all parts of myself, to every part of myself that needed attention. Scary work, as you said, not easy work. But I think that's the first necessary step. Can we just quiet down and come face to face with our very present moment experience? And can we start right there?
Beautiful. So beautiful. And how did you find the resources, the power to do that kind of work for yourself? What helped?
I met and came to sit with an Indigenous elder, a woman from a First Nations tribe in Canada, where I was doing some work at the time. And she said to me, she said, you know, Jules, I think maybe we've got it wrong in some ways. We suffer from these attachment disruptions and this, what we now call complex trauma, because we experience typically some break in the relationship with one or both of our parents. Something happens in that relationship where we don't feel seen or heard or held in some way that we needed at certain developmental stages. And she said to me, what if we all believed, as my ancestors believed, that we all come from the same birth mother? That we all have the same source, that we all have the same divine connection. And our birth mother is this divine creator that delivers us to an earth mother. And many of us have more than one earth mother, but we all have the same birth mother. And if we could, in a divine way, a deeper way within us, begin to connect with this birth mother, the source, the energy, the creator, could we find healing in that relationship instead of what we typically look for in relationship to a birth, the way we tend to think of birth mother or birth father? And there was something so powerful about the way that she described birth mother being the divine creator of all that I immediately felt wanted. I felt seen, I felt heard, I felt understood, and I wanted everyone else to feel this. And so I began to really explore some ancient wisdom right at the intersection of the current research in neuroscience and inviting that conversation, right? So just inviting science and spirit to have a conversation with one another toward the healing for all people, for all peoples everywhere. So that's where it really began for me.
Wow, that's so powerful. And it's, how do you teach that to parents, to families in a way it really reaches them in their complex, chaotic life? How can we all do that? The parents, therapists, social workers who are with families who struggle.
You know, I think there is this sense of competition between our ego and our spirit, right? And trauma is wise. There is a wisdom in trauma that protects us, right? Because at 3 years old or at 6 years old, I learned how to put these metal bars around me to protect me. But 20 years later, the metal bars were still there, but the threat was gone. And so one of the pieces that she invited me to step into was just a curiosity about what would happen if I peeked through those bars.
Curiosity.
And
Yes.
curiosity instead of that competition of my ego needing to defend me versus my spirit being curious about this birth mother that has always been there for me. And so I invite families who I work with to envision, to imagine, to pretend, to see the bars that they've wrapped around them, to name the bars that are around them, to see that they needed those bars. But perhaps today we could peek through those bars. And as I invite them to just peek through the bars, I invite them to be curious about this birth mother, this universal source, divine consciousness, birth mother waiting for us right on the other side. And we begin to go through this process of imagining that, being curious about that, pretending it could be real, and then moving through that vision into releasing ourselves from behind the bars and being fully present in the lap of birth mother. And we walk through the process 1 minute at a time. Sometimes it's a scary process for many of us. And so we're patient and we're grace-filled, and we understand that the timing is individual, but that there's nobody beyond the hope of healing. Nobody is beyond the hope of healing if we can be curious about the possibility for healing.
What an important sentence. Nobody is beyond the hope of healing. I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just two other questions before you go to sleep. I think you have the conference in front of you about collective healing. This is something sometimes discourages the people, because it's also it's such a vast, complex thing. People had historical trauma, racism, everything. And how can we get out of this together? You say we heal together, and I love these words, but what are the keys here for
Yeah. I believe there is both a collective consciousness, yes, and there's a collective unconsciousness, right? And because the majority of us have been born into a trauma field, we have been born into families and communities and countries and continents and now the world that was traumatized before we incarnated into our human beingness. And because we come into a field that's already traumatized, there is a collective experience of that trauma. Trauma doesn't happen in a vacuum. We aren't traumatized individually. When there is a relational wounding, those who traumatized me growing up were traumatized by someone else, sure, who were traumatized by someone else. And so this collective experience of trauma, first and foremost, must be acknowledged, that we are not traumatized in a vacuum and we don't heal in a vacuum. And so the way that I invite people to think about this is, I'll say the words that are coming to me as an invitation, but there is either a healing quality to every engagement we have, right, every moment of the day, or a lack of healing quality. And because it's impossible to remain emotionally regulated all of the time, I will move into my less functional states and become dysregulated. And I'm not always capable of providing a healing engagement to those who come into my field. But the important piece is, am I aware of that? Mm-hmm. Do I have a conscious awareness of my ride, if you will, between regulation and dysregulation? And can I acknowledge the times when perhaps there is an unconscious explosion within me that in relationship to another safe person, I may be able to explore and do something with? And so the collective consciousness has a brother or sister of collective unconsciousness. And the way that I invite us to begin to gently peel those layers apart is by acknowledging that every engagement I have, every engagement you have, is either healing or not. And when we are aware that we are not in the space to offer a healing engagement, can we in that moment stop? Mm-hmm. In that moment, can we stop? And we may not be able to offer a healing engagement, but can we stop from offering an engagement that's traumatizing? Can we at least pause and then give birth to a new way of being? And so this is the way that I invite us to begin to look at the collective trauma that we've experienced, that we're born into, and possibly a way to move out of that collective unconsciousness by creating an opportunity to be aware of, am I healing for you in this moment, or am I not? And can I pause, come back to my own path of compassion for self, and then re-engage in relationship to you?
Thank you. I will meet tomorrow a politician from Germany for an interview. She's a mother too, and I'm so looking forward to discuss this with her. Thank you so much. I will send this.
You're welcome.
My last question is coming back to the practical everyday life of parents. I mean, everybody is afraid of traumatizing their kids a little bit now, because we all know about that. Everybody wants to do better. Everybody wants to really give love and nurture their kids. Can you just give some last words to these parents working hard every day, losing it again? What you said, trying to stop it and burst something new. Just something you want to say to people who are fighting for that every day.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say to you and to all of your parents who are listening is thank you, because simply your awareness that we can learn about ourselves and therefore learn about our children is the first step. And to recognize that not every parent is listening to this. Not every parent has the insight and the awareness that you do. It doesn't mean, healing doesn't mean, and peace doesn't mean that we never enter chaos again. Mm-hmm. It means that when we enter that chaos, we recognize it. We honor it for what it means in our lives. We can't heal if we're beating ourselves up. So when we lose it, which I do, and I've done, and I always will in the human condition, and so will you, can I realize it? Can I come back sooner? Can I apologize? Can I bring myself into relationship with another person in a healing way by asking for and offering grace and forgiveness and recognizing our human condition? And I think the last piece I want to say about that is, this was the most difficult piece for me as a foster mom, right? I made this decision to bring more children into our home because I had a few letters after my name, and I was so loved by my own mother, and I was in a loving marriage, and we had 4 beautiful, healthy kids, and we had space and resource to offer it to more. Never in a million years could I have imagined the opportunity that was before me to learn about the truth of unconditional love. Because every day I was faced with the opportunity to make my love conditional. Every day I was faced with the opportunity to find a reason for that child to have to leave. And some of them did, in order to protect the rest of the family. But I believe there's an opportunity for us when we look at those very dark nights of the soul and those shadows that tend to become illuminated when we care for wounded children, as an opportunity to practice what you and I say we want most to become. And if I truly want to be an unconditionally loving mom, well, boy, did I get the opportunity to practice every single day. And so the gratitude for me was a way to balance out the times that I couldn't keep it together. You won't be able to always. I won't be able to always. But can we balance that so we don't give up, so we don't give in, so we keep coming back one more day, one more child, one more family at a time? That's where we are.
Thank you from my deep heart, Jules, for these words and all my love. Thank you that you do this and that you speak to the world.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your service.